fake elector plot. Let's get right to NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard with the details. Vaughn, what have you got?
Hey, Joy, this is literally just in the last 60 seconds. Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes is announcing the indictment of the 11 electors out of Arizona from the 2020 election. This has been a part of a year-long investigation for Kris Mayes. Of course, there was a Republican attorney general in the aftermath of the 2020 election who never investigated the fake elector scheme on his part. Upon taking office, she committed to this investigation, and over the better part of the last year, she has gone through this, issuing subpoenas and having individuals testify before this grand jury. And just here in the last hour in Arizona, Kris Mayes, with the approval of a state grand jury, has now indicted 11 fake electors out of Arizona. I should note, as we're beginning to make our way through this indictment, there are other individuals who are also included in this indictment, but they have not been served at this time. The indictment has those names redacted. The 11 individuals who have been indicted, who we have the names of, include the likes of Kelli Ward, who folks will recall was the Arizona GOP chairwoman at the time, as well as her husband, as well as RNC committee man out of Arizona, Tyler Boyer, who also serves as the chief operating officer of Turning Point USA, that Trump-aligned organization. You also have 2 current Arizona state legislators who are included in this indictment. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, Joy, in some states, right, there was more secretive effort to keep the fake elector scheme under wraps, right? In the state of Georgia, a secret meeting behind closed doors. In Arizona, it was a little bit different. More than a month after the 2020 election results, as Donald Trump was applying a pressure campaign on the likes of Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, as well as former House Speaker Rusty Bowers. You folks may recall that at the Arizona GOP headquarters, Kelli Ward, the GOP chairwoman of the state party at the time, actually convened a group of individuals, including the 11 electors, one of whom she was, to actually have on video them going and signing the certificate. At that point in time, the certificate was sent to the National Archives in Congress. So again, Joy, literally as you and I are discussing here, we're just beginning to make our way through this indictment. But now we have individuals who are electors in Georgia and Michigan and now in Arizona as well, who have been formally indicted on state charges stemming from this alleged scheme to send to Washington, D.C., ultimately a different slate of electors to be counted on January 6th of 2021.
Don't go anywhere, Vaughn. I just want to hold on to you for just a second. Andrew Weissmann, I want to get first to your reaction. I also want to get Tim Hafey's reaction, but I want to go to you first, Andrew.
Sure. I'm fascinated by the fact that Vaughn is reporting that they're redacted names.
That was my question, too, yeah.
And I wonder if Vaughn could speak to, it sounds like they were able to serve people who are local, who might be Arizona people. From that, would it be fair to infer that there may be people who, because the scheme as alleged elsewhere in various indictments is that people at the Trump campaign were orchestrating this. In other words, this didn't come from the bottom up. This was coming from D.C. down. From that, could you infer that at least some of the redacted names may be, people who are in the Trump campaign?
Right. Andrew, I'm actually, if you'll work with me, I'm looking the same screen that I have my camera on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names are redacted. So there were the 11 fake electors out of Arizona, and 7 additional names that are redacted here. When we are looking at multiple counts, 9 different counts, count 1, conspiracy, count 2, fraudulent schemes, count 3, fraudulent schemes and practices, and counts 4 through 9 are forgery. We also, in all 11 of those individuals, were all indicted on all 9 of those counts. The 7 redacted names, we do not have the counts on as well. So I'm going to have to scan through this just so folks know what we're scanning through here. We're looking at, from Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes, a 58-page indictment that was signed here by the foreperson just here in this last hour. So to better answer everybody's questions here, I'm going to work my way through this here in real time, if I may, guys.
Yeah, let me let you work through it. So I'm going to take you off camera for a minute, let you work through that. I'm going to let you keep reading. I'm going to get Timothy Hayfie to go ahead and give us your response. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, no, it sounds very consistent with the Michigan case, with a portion of the Georgia case. As Andrew said, this was a top-down scheme. It was the RNC and members of the Trump campaign who were encouraging electors in these contested states to submit certificates purporting to be official. That's where the crime comes in, certifying falsely that President Trump had won those states. The signature on those documents and the attempt to have them considered by Congress is what makes them fraudulent. They are fake elector certificates. The redacted names could very well be officials of the Trump campaign. Mike Roman comes to mind. He's indicted in Georgia and was one of the people who was on the phone organizing this activity with individuals in Michigan, in Arizona, and in Georgia. So my guess is it's the individuals in Arizona who have been named, and then it's some additional folks in Washington or elsewhere that were part of the broader scheme to get all 7 of these contested states to submit these fake elector certificates. All of that, of course, sets up some predicate for dispute, something for the vice president potentially to accept at the joint session, a basis on which members of Congress could object. It was all part of a broader scheme led by the former president. That's what's at stake in these criminal cases in Washington and Georgia.
Andrew, I'm not a math person, but 11 electors indicted plus 9 redacted says 20 to me. A lot of people talked about how broad the Georgia indictment was, but that indictment included fake electors, people who were part of that scheme. It also included not just people from the Trump campaign, but very ostentatiously people from the Trump White House, including his chief of staff. So if you're looking at an indictment this broad and you've got names redacted, shouldn't that say feds to us as well? Federal people who are federal officials, maybe.
I mean, the thing I just sort of think is if they unredacted the Arizona people, I'm just sort of logically, it would suggest those people maybe outside of the state. And given that the scheme was really orchestrated, as we keep on saying, top down, I'm going to be interested in who the top people are that are getting indicted. And remember, but for Donald Trump, if he becomes president again, he may have immunity. These state charges, people should remember, they stick. There is no federal pardon power for these charges. So when we find out the full panoply, the pressure on them is great because they can't be sitting there thinking, oh, I don't have to worry because Donald Trump, if he becomes president, he's going to pardon me. They're going to hold the bag. Just to be clear.
Let me go back to Vaughn really quickly, because we do have this list of redacted names. Is there some way to eliminate the possibility that, as is the case in Georgia, Trump's name is on that list?
It's a very good question, Joy. We have no reporting that suggested that Donald Trump had received a subpoena or even a request to appear before this grand jury. So the extent to Chris May's investigation is still, frankly, not clear. I think that when we're looking at Chris May's here, again, I got to come back to the fact that she didn't come into office until in 2023 here. Essentially, she had a 2-year delayed start in being able to pick up this investigation. And when she came into office, in a race that she won by just about 270 votes, she made the commitment. She said that she needed to send a clear message that trying to overturn democratic elections in the state of Arizona, to those who attempt to do that, that a clear message will be sent that they will not be able to do that into the future, and that she found it imperative to go forward with this investigation, despite others suggesting, 3.5 years have passed at this point. But we, the American public, became familiar with Rusty Bowers' own story. Of course, Rusty Bowers was the Speaker of the Arizona legislature at the time when he says and testified to this, that he got phone calls from the likes of Donald Trump and allies urging him to send this alternate slate of electors on behalf of the legislature, right? So these guys on December 14th at Arizona GOP headquarters, they were all there on video signing their names, all 11 of them, on this certificate that was sent to Congress. But they were also in real time trying to more formally use the legislature to send and make that the formal certificate sent by the state of Arizona, not the Biden slate of electors. Rusty Bauer said, sorry, we're not going with that game plan. We, as the Arizona state legislature, are sending the Biden slate of electors. Folks will also recall, Joy, Doug Ducey, the governor, was then the next individual who was a part of that pressure campaign. And folks will recall when he later that month in December was literally signing the certificate that Biden had won the state of Arizona, his phone rang and it was Donald Trump that was calling him, and he turned it over and left it on mute. And so this, in the state of Arizona, was the length to the means in which these individuals, the chairwoman of the state party, as well as the RNC committeeman, Tyler Boyer, went. And now we know as an extension of this, of course, Kari Lake was, I should be clear, was not a part of this indictment here, but they are, this is for all intents and purposes, the Republican Party of the state of Arizona.
Absolutely.
And now in a critical moment here for the state of Arizona and the Republican Party, just 6 months out from a general election, they have this indictment on their hands. It's just it's a complicating scene, and one that I think that we're only beginning to wholly understand the details of.
It's absolutely stunning.